Welcome to another episode. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from and what time is it there? I always love to imagine the different corners of the world we drift through together. And if you'd like more journeys like this one, don't forget to subscribe. It truly helps this little world keep growing. Tonight, I'd like to take you somewhere noisy, smoky, and endlessly fascinating. A place where the streets are crowded with horse-drawn carriages, gas lamps glow in the mist, and the air smells faintly of coal smoke, fresh bread, and something you can't quite identify, but hope isn't what you think it is. This is London, sometime in the second half of the 19th century, the Victorian age. A city in the middle of an identity crisis, torn between elegance and grime, tradition and the industrial roar of progress. The first thing that strikes you isn't the sight of London, it's the sound. Hooves clatter against wet cobblestones, each clip-clop echoing between rows of soot-stained buildings. Street hawkers cry out their goods with a practiced rhythm. Hot pies, hot eels, fresh mackerel. Somewhere in the distance, the deep whistle of a factory cuts through the din, while nearer, the bell of a hansom cab jingles as the driver snaps the reins. Visually, the city is a patchwork of wealth and want. You might be walking past a grand row of white stuccoed townhouses with polished brass knockers and neat iron railings, only to turn a corner into a narrow, muddy alley where laundry flaps between leaning brick buildings and barefoot children chase each other around barrels. The Victorians believed firmly in knowing one's place, and the geography of the city reflects that. The wealthy clustered in the West End, the working poor crammed into the East End, and an unspoken agreement that the two should meet only when necessary. Above all of it hangs the haze of coal smoke. Every home with a fireplace contributes to it. Every factory chimney adds another layer. It settles into your clothes, your hair, even your tea. For a Londoner of the time, this is simply the smell of life. And then there are the smells they'd rather not talk about. Sewers, though vastly improved after the great stink of 1858, still aren't perfect. Rainwater and less than pure waste mingle in gutters, giving the city a background note best described as challenging. If you've ever wondered why so many Victorians carried scented handkerchiefs, this might be your answer. Transport is a constant ballet of chaos. Horse-drawn omnibuses rumble by, their conductors calling for passengers to hop on the back platform. Hansom cabs dart between them, drivers squinting through the drizzle. Pedestrians, and there are many, step carefully to avoid puddles of indeterminate depth and origin. Crossing the street is less about finding a safe moment and more about summoning the willpower to go for it. But there's a kind of thrill here too. London in the Victorian age is a city that believes it is at the centre of the world. Empire, industry, literature, science, it all converges here. You can hear 10 different accents in a single market, watch a new invention being demonstrated in the window of a shop, and then stroll past a centuries-old church whose bells have been ringing since before Shakespeare's time. It is messy, it is magnificent, and as the morning fog begins to lift, the city is already wide awake, ready to pull you into its restless rhythm. The day begins early in Victorian London, earlier than you might like. By the time the first thin light has found its way through the fog, the streets are already alive. Porters heave crates off carts, shopkeepers sweep the pavement in front of their windows, and chimney sweeps, often small, soot-blackened boys, are already at work, their brushes rattling in flues like some kind of mechanical crow. If you follow the noise, you might find yourself at Billingsgate Fish Market. It's not subtle. The scent of the sea mingles with the smell of the city, and the result is memorable. Here, great piles of cod, mackerel, and herring lie glistening on wooden slabs, while fishmongers in aprons shout prices and insults in equal measure. The market is a sea of flat caps and rough coats, men with hands reddened from the cold, women bargaining with a kind of aggressive politeness that could cut through steel. A short walk away, Smithfield Market hums with its own kind of energy. The air is thick with the smell of raw meat, whole sides of beef, lamb carcasses, and crates of poultry swinging from hooks. The butcher's knives flash in the weak sunlight, and the cobbles are slick underfoot. It's not for the faint-hearted, but for many, this is the lifeblood of the city. If you want to feed London, you start here. In between these great markets, the streets are crowded with smaller traders. Costermongers push wooden barrows piled with apples, potatoes, or baskets of live chickens. They sing out their wares in a kind of half-melody that's been passed down for generations, sometimes adding a few exaggerated claims, that cabbage is fresher than morning dew, that pie crust lighter than a feather. Accuracy is optional, salesmanship is everything. Newspaper boys are everywhere, weaving through the crowd with stacks under their arms, shouting the day's headlines, scandals, murders, and the latest news from the Empire. Victorian London loves a good scandal almost as much as it loves a cup of tea. Speaking of tea, by now the smell of it is drifting from tea rooms and coffee houses. For the middle classes, this is the hour to take a seat by the window, open the morning paper and sip something hot while keeping an eye on who's passing in the street. Conversation is polite but calculated. You never know when an offhand remark might be repeated in another drawing room entirely. Letters are being delivered by the penny post, the revolutionary service introduced in 1840. For a single penny, you can send a letter anywhere in Britain, and people do, constantly. Postmen in smart uniforms stride quickly from house to house, slipping envelopes through brass slots, entirely unaware that they've just fueled another round of gossip for the day. By mid-morning, the city is fully awake. Omnibuses clatter down the main roads, carrying clerks toward the city's banks and counting houses. Shop windows gleam with displays, bolts of silk, gold watches, parasols with carved ivory handles. The working poor hurry past them on their way to factories and workshops, glancing only briefly before disappearing into alleys that lead to long, grey hours of labour. London's day is underway, and whether you're a merchant, a costermonger, or a coal porter, there's no standing still. The city won't let you. If Victorian London has one defining feature, it's contrast. Extremes of wealth and poverty existing not just in the same city, but often within walking distance of each other. In the West End, wide boulevards are lined with townhouses in neat terraces, their facades whitewashed and identical, as though to remind you that uniformity is a form of status. Here, the streets are quiet, the air smells faintly of horse polish and flowers from carefully maintained gardens, and the only coal smoke is from discreet chimneys behind the houses. Step inside one of these homes and you'll find polished mahogany furniture, velvet curtains, and oil paintings of distant ancestors staring sternly down from the walls. Servants move quietly from room to room, carrying silver trays or tending fires, the invisible army that keeps the lives of the wealthy running smoothly. There are strict rules here: who may call at the front door, what time tea should be served, even how one is to hold a teacup. Never with the pinky finger extended, that's a myth. Conversation is polite, calculated, and carefully steered away from anything too unpleasant, which is convenient because the unpleasantness is just a few miles east. The East End is another London entirely. Here the streets narrow, and the smell of the Thames mixes with coal dust, sweat, and the faint tang of rotting cabbage from overcrowded tenement kitchens. Rows of brick buildings lean slightly inward, as though conspiring to shut out the sun. Children play barefoot in the gutters, chasing hoops or trying to earn pennies running errands. Women scrub clothes in steaming tin tubs outside their doors, their hands red from the water. Life here is loud and chaotic. Costermongers, dock workers, and factory labourers shout to each other over the noise of cartwheels and the calls of street vendors. If the West End's economy runs on inherited wealth, the East End's runs on muscle, carrying crates at the docks, stitching garments in cramped rooms, hauling coal from barges. Between these extremes lies the vast middle class, a relatively new and growing force in Victorian life. Clerks, shop owners, school teachers, and journalists fill neighbourhoods of modest terraced houses. Their lives are a balancing act between ambition and propriety, aspiring to the manners of the upper class while keeping a wary eye on the costs of keeping up appearances. Clothing is one of the clearest markers of class. A wealthy gentleman might wear a perfectly tailored frock coat, silk cravat, and a top hat so shiny you can see your reflection in it. In the middle class, you might see the same style in cheaper wool, with boots a little scuffed from walking rather than riding. In the working class, clothes are sturdy and patched, bought to last rather than to impress. Those Sundays bring out a best suit or dress, carefully brushed and mended. Despite the strict divisions, the classes do meet, in shops, at public events, or simply passing on the same pavement. But it's an unspoken rule that everyone knows their place. To forget it is to invite gossip, scandal, or at the very least, a frosty silence over tea. By late morning, London is fully in motion, and so is its vast machine of labour. If you stand in the heart of the city, the financial district, you'll see clerks hurrying into tall stone buildings with ledgers tucked under their arms, their hats pulled low against the drizzle. Inside, the air smells faintly of ink and damp wool, and the only sounds are the scratching of pens, the rustle of paper, and the occasional authoritative ahem from a senior clerk whose job is half accounting and half intimidation. But clerical work is just one thread in London's industrial tapestry. In the East End, factories hum with the clatter of textile looms and the hiss of steam. Men shovel coal into roaring furnaces. Women feed fabric into sewing machines, their fingers a blur. In some workshops, the air is so thick with lint or dust you can taste it, and lighting comes from grimy windows that let in just enough daylight to work by, but never enough to soften the shadows. Docklands along the Thames are another world of labour. Great cargo ships from India, China, Africa and the Americas crowd the wharves, unloading everything from tea and spices to timber and whale oil. Dockers in rough coats and caps move in teams, hauling crates on their shoulders, stacking barrels and shouting over the creak of pulleys. The work is brutal, the pay uncertain, and yet the docks are one of the city's beating hearts. Without them, the capital would starve, shiver and grow very, very sober. Child labour is still a grim reality, though reforms are beginning to take root. In some trades, boys as young as 8 work long hours in workshops delivering parcels or selling goods in the street. Chimney sweeping, perhaps the most infamous of Victorian jobs, still uses small children to wriggle up narrow flues, scraping away soot. Their pay is meagre, their safety questionable, and yet many families rely on those extra pennies to make ends meet. Reformers are pushing for change, and laws are slowly improving conditions, but the wheels of Parliament turn almost as slowly as those of the old mills. Domestic service, however, employs more people than any other sector. In the grand houses of Mayfair and Belgravia, armies of maids, cooks, footmen and butlers keep the lives of the wealthy polished and punctual. A good servant is expected to be invisible, moving silently, anticipating needs before they're spoken, and certainly never making the mistake of being noticed for the wrong reasons. For many young women from rural villages, entering service is both a chance at steady income and a life of endless, thankless tasks. Not all work is heavy or dreary. There are shopkeepers arranging their window displays just so, bookbinders pressing leather covers into gold leaf designs, and flower sellers in Covent Garden, their stalls spilling with blooms that bring a burst of colour to the grey streets. Even so, the city's rhythm is relentless. Work begins early, ends late, and waits for no one. Whether you're balancing ledgers in an office, hammering iron in a forge, or polishing silver in a townhouse kitchen, the message is the same. London runs because you do. Victorians work hard, but when the day's labour ends, London knows how to amuse itself. It's a city with entertainments for every class, from the genteel to the gloriously chaotic, and the choice depends largely on the weight of your purse and the thickness of your boots. For the well-heeled of the West End, the evening might begin in one of the grand theatres along Drury Lane or the Strand. Gas lamps illuminate carved facades, their golden light spilling onto the pavement where elegant couples arrive in handsome cabs. Inside, velvet seats and chandeliers await, along with a programme that might feature a Shakespeare revival, a lavish opera, or one of the sentimental dramas Victorians adored. The audience is a performance in itself. Ladies fanning themselves, gentlemen scanning the room for acquaintances, and everyone pretending not to notice anyone of questionable reputation in attendance. A short walk away, the atmosphere shifts in the music halls. Here the stage belongs to comic singers, jugglers, dancers, and patter artists who can spit out jokes faster than a typist in a hurry. The crowd is noisier, the drinks stronger, and the laughs louder. Songs with cheeky double meanings are encouraged, as long as they're disguised well enough for polite society to pretend they don't understand them. Pubs are the city's other great social equaliser. From polished taverns in the West End to the rougher gin palaces of the East End, they offer warmth, conversation, and the comforting weight of a pint glass in your hand. In working-class districts, a pub might host a sing-along, with one or two patrons banging out a tune on a battered piano while the rest join in, some in harmony, others with enthusiasm alone. For a quieter kind of leisure, there's Hyde Park. In the afternoons, the promenade becomes a fashion parade. Ladies in wide skirts and elaborate bonnets stroll arm in arm, their parasols twirling lazily, while gentlemen in top hats and neatly pressed frock coats tip their hats to acquaintances. This is less about exercise and more about being seen, the Victorian equivalent of updating one's social profile. And then there is the Crystal Palace, built for the Great Exhibition of 1851 and later moved to Sydenham. Its massive glass walls and iron frame contain everything from sculpture and botanical gardens to fountains and exhibits of new technology. You might see a steam engine the size of a small house, an entire display of exotic plants from the colonies, or a case of oddly shaped fruits that have never before been seen in London, except perhaps in the imagination of a particularly eccentric grocer. Even the streets themselves can be entertainment. A busker with a fiddle might gather a small crowd at a street corner. A street magician may pull coins from a child's ear, and on certain nights fireworks burst over the Thames, the smoke mixing with the ever-present coal haze until it's hard to tell where celebration ends and city air begins. Whether sipping champagne in a private box, laughing in a packed music hall, or leaning on a bridge to watch fireworks, Victorian London offers a reminder. For all its industry and order, it's also a city that understands the importance of a good night out. Victorian London runs on coal, gossip and tea, though not necessarily in that order. From grand banquets in Belgravia to pie stalls under railway arches, the city's food reflects its social layers as sharply as its fashion does. At the top end of the scale, dinner in a wealthy household is a small military operation. The table is laid with polished silver, crystal glasses, and more forks than you can identify. Meals are served in multiple courses: turtle soup, roast pheasant, beef with Madeira sauce, followed by puddings so rich they could be classified as architectural feats. Every dish arrives with ceremony, announced by a butler who could probably run the government if given half a chance. But the majority of Londoners dine on humbler fare. The middle class takes pride in respectably plain meals, roast beef with potatoes perhaps, or a nice meat pie. Afternoon tea is a ritual here. A pot of strong black tea, thinly sliced bread and butter, and maybe a sponge cake if company is expected. This is not indulgence. It is the proper order of things, as vital as punctuality or ironed linens. For the working class, meals are more about survival than display. Breakfast might be bread with dripping, or porridge if there's time. Lunch could be a hunk of cheese or a meat pie bought from a street vendor, ideally before the filling cools to a mysterious and possibly geological consistency. Dinner is whatever can be stretched to feed the whole family. Boiled cabbage, stewed mutton, or if luck is with you, fish and potatoes. Street food is the heartbeat of the city's appetite. Vendors shout their wares from barrows and baskets, hot pies, steam curling up from the crust. Roast chestnuts, their shells splitting with a soft crackle. Hot eels, because Victorians apparently had a fondness for eel stew, sold in ladles from large simmering pots. In colder months, baked potatoes wrapped in newspaper are a working man's luxury, warming both hands and stomach. Then there's the great national beverage, tea. By the late 1800s, Britain is importing hundreds of millions of pounds of tea each year, much of it coming through London's docks. Every household, no matter how poor, makes time for it, often sweetened heavily with sugar and poured into chipped mugs. The aroma of brewing tea drifts from every open doorway, competing with the coal smoke and horse manure for dominance in the city's air. Of course, not all drinks are so wholesome. Gin, once blamed for moral collapse in the previous century, still has its devotees. But beer is the safer and more socially acceptable choice, drunk by labourers in tankards after a long day, or by clerks discussing politics over a pint in the corner of a pub. Water, sadly, is the least recommended option. The city's supply, though improved since the cholera outbreaks, still inspires more suspicion than thirst. Whether you dine under chandeliers or standing in a muddy street, food in Victorian London is more than sustenance. It's a statement of class, of taste, and sometimes simply of survival. Victorian London likes to think of itself as the workshop of the world, a place where progress is not just expected, but paraded proudly in front of anyone who'll look, and sometimes even those who won't. Walk along the Strand or Regent Street, and you'll see shop windows filled with curiosities. Pocket watches with impossibly intricate gears, photographic portraits staring back in perfect detail, even mechanical toys that walk, spin, or play tiny tunes. There's a sense here that the future can be bought wrapped in brown paper and taken home for tea. Some of the biggest marvels are in the city's infrastructure. Gaslight, which began to appear in the early 1800s, now lines the streets, casting a steady golden glow over the pavements and making the fog look almost romantic, if you ignore the smell of burning coal. A few experimental buildings are even showing off electric light, though many Victorians regard it with a mix of awe and suspicion, as if it might leap off the wall and bite someone. Then there's the London Underground, which opened in 1863, the world's first subterranean railway. Early passengers, riding in wooden carriages hauled by steam locomotives, described it as adventurous and slightly suffocating, but the novelty outweighed the discomfort. For the first time, you could get from Paddington to Farringdon without battling through London's street traffic, though you might arrive with the faint scent of soot in your hair. The crowning glory of Victorian innovation was perhaps the Great Exhibition of 1851, held in Hyde Park's Crystal Palace. Imagine it, a vast glass and iron building filled with everything from steam engines and printing presses to the latest in textile machinery and a display of massive Koh-i-Noor diamond. There were even entire colonial displays, exotic plants, animals, and cultural artifacts shipped from the far reaches of the empire to be admired, puzzled over, or occasionally misinterpreted entirely by curious Londoners. Science in the Victorian era was as much about spectacle as about knowledge. Lectures at the Royal Institution could draw huge crowds, eager to watch experiments with electricity, chemistry, and the newly discovered marvel of photography. Some scientists, like Michael Faraday, became almost celebrity figures, known for their public demonstrations. And then there were the less reputable inventors, offering miraculous health devices, perpetual motion machines, or tonics guaranteed to cure everything from gout to heartbreak, all for a modest fee, of course. Not all progress was glamorous. Sewage systems, redesigned by engineer Joseph Bazalgette in the 1860s, quietly saved thousands of lives by moving waste out of the city and into treatment works. It wasn't as exciting as a steam-powered printing press, but it was far more important for public health, and it finally ended the notorious Great Stink that had driven MPs from Parliament just a few years earlier. Victorian London's relationship with innovation is a bit like its relationship with fashion. It adores the new, but never lets go entirely of the old. Gas lamps glow alongside experimental electric lights. Horse-drawn omnibuses rumble past underground entrances, and while the city dreams of the future, it still keeps one boot firmly planted in cobblestone tradition. When the sun dips behind the rooftops of London, the city doesn't sleep. It changes costume. Gas lamps flare to life, their golden halos glowing in the mist, and the damp cobblestones shine as though someone has polished them for the occasion. Shadows stretch longer, and the sound of hooves on stone becomes sharper, echoing down narrow lanes. In the West End, the evening crowd is on display. Theatres open their doors, and hansom cabs deposit passengers in silk dresses and black tailcoats under porticos lit like stages. There's a certain choreography to it. The polite greetings, the flash of tickets, the muffled rustle of skirts on marble steps. Inside, chandeliers blaze, and the scent of perfume competes with that of gaslight and wool. Pubs fill quickly after dark. In working-class neighbourhoods, men crowd shoulder to shoulder at the bar, tankards clinking as they swap news, argue about football, or retell the same joke for the 5th time. A joke that somehow gets funnier with each telling. In more respectable districts, Gin palaces gleam with cut-glass windows and polished brass fittings, the air inside warm and smelling faintly of juniper and pipe tobacco. Street life after dark is a mixture of charm and caution. Vendors still hawk roasted chestnuts or baked potatoes from braziers, their faces lit from below by the glow of coals. A busker plays a mournful tune on a fiddle, drawing a small crowd that sways gently in the lamplight. At the same time, the police, the bobbies, patrol steadily, their helmets bobbing above the crowd. Their presence is as much about reassurance as deterrence, though certain alleys and lanes are best avoided without company. Fog often rolls in after nightfall, thickening the light until it turns the city into a half-seen dreamscape. Gas lamps turn into floating orbs, handsome cab drivers squint through the haze, and pedestrians vanish into the mist only to reappear a few paces later. It's atmospheric, yes, the kind of thing poets love, but it also hides a multitude of petty crimes and the occasional more serious one. Jack the Ripper's reign of terror is still fresh in some minds, and tales of mysterious disappearances find eager ears in both pubs and drawing rooms. Not all of Victorian nightlife is respectable. In certain parts of the city, music halls spill laughter and song into the streets, while back rooms host gambling games that run until the small hours. Elsewhere, dimly lit taverns serve as meeting places for political radicals, artists, and those who simply enjoy the idea of being somewhere they shouldn't be. And yet, for many, the night is gentle. Families gather around the fire, the day's clothes neatly folded, a kettle hissing softly as it boils water for a final cup of tea. Children fall asleep to the muted rumble of the city outside, while parents read aloud from a novel, perhaps Dickens, perhaps a serialized mystery from the penny press. London at night is a contradiction, romantic and dangerous, bustling and still. It hums with the same restless energy as the day, but softened, wrapped in fog and lamplight, as if the city itself has drawn a blanket over its shoulders. And so the lamps burn low. The pubs close their doors, the last hansom cabs rattle home, and the city exhales. The Thames moves quietly under its bridges, carrying the reflections of gaslight and moonlight together in its dark surface. Even the fog seems to rest, curling lazily around the corners of sleeping streets. Victorian London is a city of contrasts, of silk gowns and soot-stained shirts, of tea served on fine china and hot pies eaten from a street stall, of invention and tradition holding hands while eyeing each other suspiciously. It is never entirely elegant, never entirely grim, but always alive. If you've walked its streets today, you've heard the clipped trot of horses on cobblestones, smelled the mingling of coal smoke and roasted chestnuts, felt the jostle of a market crowd, and perhaps caught the faint vibration of a music hall song through the walls. You've seen grandeur that could rival any capital in the world, and poverty that sits, stubbornly, in its shadow. History often leaves us with clean lines and tidy dates, but here, the past is textured. It clings to you like London fog, settling into your coat, your hair, your memory. You can't quite shake it, and you wouldn't want to. As the last of the night's voices fade and the city curls inward to sleep, carry a little of it with you. The glow of gaslight in the mist, the hum of 1,000 footsteps on wet stone, the sense that every street has a story and every face, whether passing in a carriage or peering from a doorway, belongs to someone living their day in the great tangled web of the city. Sleep well, and when you wake, perhaps you'll hear the faint echo of hooves, far away, but not entirely gone, as if Victorian London is still out there, just waiting for you to step back inside.